Ethan Cole never thought his quiet work as a cargo pilot would bring him into the path of royalty. He was just a man with a small ship, moving supplies from one outpost to another, keeping his head down and avoiding trouble. But the stars had other plans for him on that day. While moving through a crowded asteroid field, he caught a distress call that flickered through his old comm system. Most pilots would have ignored it, fearing pirates or traps, but Ethan was not the kind of man to leave someone behind. He adjusted his controls and followed the signal. The sound of static grew sharper, and then a voice, soft and frightened, broke through the noise. It was a child. She cried out for help, saying her shuttle was under attack. Ethan's chest tightened as he scanned the field ahead. Then he saw it. A small silver shuttle was being chased by two dark ships, each firing bursts of light that tore through space like spears. The shuttle's shields were breaking apart, and it spun helplessly between the rocks. Without thinking, Ethan pushed his ship forward. His freighter was not built for fighting, but he knew the asteroids could be used as cover. He cut the power at the right moment, letting the rocks hide his ship's approach. As one of the attackers circled wide, Ethan struck. He forced his engines to full burn, smashing the side of his freighter against the enemy's hull. Sparks and fire spread through the black, and the first attacker fell silent, drifting into the endless dark. The second ship turned on him quickly. His freighter shook as blasts hit his side. Alarms screamed and warning lights painted the cabin red. Ethan gritted his teeth and pulled hard on the controls. His ship scraped a giant asteroid, breaking one of his stabilizers, but the move threw the enemy off balance. With one last desperate push, Ethan fired his mining lasers into the attacker's fuel lines. The ship flared bright, then vanished into nothing but floating scraps. Breathing hard, Ethan turned his eyes back to the shuttle. It was spinning, damaged, and he could see fire across its hull. Carefully, he closed the distance. His voice was calm when he opened his comm channel, though his hands shook from the fight. "This is pilot Ethan Cole. I am docking with you now. Hold on." There was silence for a moment. Then the child's voice returned, trembling but alive. "Please, hurry." His docking clamps held firm as he locked onto the shuttle. When the doors opened, smoke filled the air. Ethan coughed and pushed forward, using a small light to guide his way. There, near the back of the cabin, he found her. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, sat curled up beneath a broken console. Her golden dress was torn, and her cheeks were streaked with tears, but she was breathing. Ethan knelt down and spoke softly. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her small hand reached for his, and without hesitation he lifted her into his arms. She clung to him tightly, whispering something he almost missed. "They wanted to take me away." He carried her back to his freighter, moving quickly before the shuttle broke apart completely. Once inside his own ship, he laid her gently in the passenger seat. She looked up at him with wide eyes, full of both fear and trust. "Who are you?" she asked. "Just a pilot," Ethan answered. "But I will get you home." As he set a course back to open space, he finally sent a message to the nearest royal channel, explaining the situation. It was then that he learned who the girl was. She was Lily, the daughter of Queen Alexandra, ruler of the great human empire that spanned across the stars. Ethan's heart sank as he realized the weight of what he had done. He had saved not just a child, but the heir to a throne. Outside his window, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and silent. Inside his ship, the girl rested quietly, her small hand still holding his sleeve. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then back at the controls. His ship was damaged, and enemies could return at any time. But no matter what came next, he knew he had made the only choice he could. He had saved her life, and now he would see her safely delivered, no matter the cost. Ethan Cole guided his damaged freighter toward the nearest fleet base, his eyes heavy, but his mind sharp. The girl sat quietly beside him, her small hands folded in her lap. Every now and then, she glanced at him, as if unsure if she could trust him completely. But when their eyes met, she always gave a small nod, as though reminding herself that he had saved her. The base soon appeared in the distance, a shining fortress among the stars. Signals from the guards filled his comm, asking for identification and clearance. Ethan explained who he was, and that he carried the daughter of the queen. There was silence at first, and then sudden urgency in their voices. Within minutes, fighters surrounded his freighter, guiding him in like an escort for royalty. When his ship landed inside the wide hangar, soldiers rushed forward in rows. Their armor gleamed and their movements were sharp and disciplined. Medics reached for the little girl, but she shook her head and refused to let go of Ethan's arm. She held onto him tightly as though she feared she would be taken away again. A tall officer stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with respect. "Pilot Cole, the Queen requests your presence at once. She wishes to see the man who returned her daughter." Ethan wanted nothing more than to stay with his ship and repair it. He was no man of courts or palaces, but he looked at Lily, and her eyes begged him not to leave her side. With a sigh, he nodded, and together they walked with the guards through long halls of silver and glass. The air in the throne chamber was heavy and grand. Long banners hung from the high ceiling, and every step echoed against polished stone floors. At the end of the chamber stood Queen Alexandra herself. Her presence filled the room before she even spoke. Her dark robes shimmered faintly, and her crown seemed to catch the light of every torch around her. But it was not her crown that made her striking. It was her eyes. Sharp, calm, and filled with both strength and sorrow. When she saw Lily, her mask of authority broke. She rushed forward, dropping all formality, and embraced her daughter tightly. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered promises of safety and love. Ethan stood quietly, unsure if he should stay or leave. But Lily would not let go of his hand, even as she buried her face against her mother's robes. "Ah!" After a long moment, Alexandra looked at Ethan. Her gaze was steady, almost searching his soul. "You are the one who saved her," she said softly. Ethan bowed his head slightly. "I was only in the right place at the right time, Your Majesty." "No," she said firmly. "You were in the wrong place, surrounded by danger, and still you chose to act. Many others would have turned away. You did not." The chamber filled with whispers from nobles and guards. Some studied Ethan with suspicion, as though they could not believe a simple cargo pilot stood in the Queen's hall. Others looked impressed, their eyes shining with curiosity. Ethan, however, felt only out of place. The Queen lifted Lily in her arms, but the girl reached back toward Ethan. "He saved me," she whispered again, as if reminding everyone in the hall. Alexandra's eyes softened. She gave a small nod. "Then he will be honored." Later that evening, a quiet meal was arranged in the royal dining hall. Ethan found himself seated at a long table filled with food he had never seen in his life. Roasted meats, spiced fruits, and golden bread lined the plates. Yet he had little appetite. The Queen sat across from him, her daughter safe at her side. "You are not used to this life," Alexandra said gently, noticing his unease. "I am a pilot," Ethan replied simply. "I move cargo. I work on engines. I do not belong in halls like this." The Queen studied him for a long time, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps that is why you belong more than any of them. You did not act for power or for gain. You acted because it was right." Her words left Ethan silent. He felt the weight of many eyes on him, the whispers of nobles continuing to circle through the room. But beneath all of it, he could see the truth in Alexandra's expression. She was not simply thanking him. She was measuring him, wondering what kind of man he truly was. And as Lily leaned against her mother's arm, her small voice broke the silence once more. "I want him to stay." The Queen looked at her daughter, then back at Ethan. Her eyes were unreadable, but in them, he sensed something new. It was not only gratitude, it was curiosity, and perhaps the beginning of something more. Ethan stayed in the palace longer than he wished. After the rescue, he had thought he would be free to return to his small freighter, repair the broken stabilizers, and go back to his quiet life. But the Queen had ordered that he remain close until the investigation of the attack was complete. The palace guards watched him with wary eyes, and the nobles whispered behind tall pillars as he passed. He tried to ignore their stares, but it was impossible. Everywhere he went, people stopped talking when he entered the room. Some looked at him with suspicion, as if he was a thief who had stumbled into the wrong place. Others looked at him with curiosity, whispering about the common pilot who had saved the young princess. Ethan did not care for their words. He only wanted to return to the stars. But Lily would not let him drift into the shadows. The little girl followed him whenever she could, slipping away from her attendants, just to sit near him. She asked him questions about ships and engines, about stars and worlds beyond the palace. Ethan answered her with patience, though he felt out of place under the golden lights of the court. One evening, while walking through the long garden halls, Ethan overheard voices. Two nobles stood by a fountain, their tones sharp and angry. "The queen grows careless," one said. "She invites a stranger into her hall. A pilot with no title, no family, no loyalty, and already her daughter clings to him. This is dangerous." "Yes," the other agreed. "Men like him bring nothing but trouble. If he remains, he will change the court. Better he vanish before that happens." Ethan moved away before they noticed him, his chest heavy with unease. He had never wanted power, nor did he care for their politics, but he could feel the danger in their words. The nobles did not see him as a hero, they saw him as a threat. Later that night, Ethan walked through the hangar where his freighter was being repaired by palace workers. He felt more at home there, among the smell of oil and the sound of tools. His hand brushed the hull of his ship and he longed for the quiet escape it promised. But when he turned, he found Queen Alexandra watching him. "You are restless," she said. "This place is not for me," Ethan admitted. "I am a pilot, not a court guest. Your nobles are right to question me. I do not belong." The queen stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Perhaps you do not belong in their world, but you belong in mine. You saved my daughter when no one else could. Do not let their whispers decide your worth." Ethan had no answer. Her words struck something deep in him, something he could not explain. He bowed his head and returned to his ship, though her voice followed him like an echo. Days later, the palace was shaken again. Word spread quickly of traitors hiding within the court. Whispers turned into fear as guards discovered secret messages sent to the same attackers who had chased Lily's shuttle. Ethan felt the tension in the air, the way every servant looked twice over their shoulder, the way every guard held their weapons tighter, and during a royal gathering, danger revealed itself. Ethan stood near the side of the hall, far from the queen's throne, when he noticed a servant move strangely. The man's eyes darted about, and his hands shook as he reached inside his coat. Ethan's instincts flared. Without thinking, he pushed through the crowd and lunged forward. A blade flashed in the servant's hand, aimed at the queen. Shouts filled the hall, but Ethan was faster. He struck the man's arm, forcing the blade to fall. Guards swarmed in, seizing the traitor before he could move again. The queen rose, her eyes wide, her composure broken for the first time since Ethan had met her. Silence fell across the hall, broken only by the heavy breaths of those present. "Again," she whispered, her gaze locked on Ethan. "Again you have stood between danger and my family." The nobles murmured louder now, but their whispers were no longer only suspicious. Some spoke of destiny, others of loyalty. Ethan, however, felt none of that. He felt only the rush of adrenaline and the simple truth that once more he had done what had to be done. As guards dragged the traitor away, Lily ran to Ethan's side, clutching his hand tightly. "You saved her," she said, her voice bright with pride. Ethan looked at her, then at the queen. Alexandra's eyes were no longer cold and distant. They were warm, thoughtful, and filled with a strange kind of trust. In that moment, Ethan realized that his life was already tied to theirs, whether he wished it or not. The days after the attempted attack were tense. Guards filled every hall, and the queen's advisors whispered in corners. Speaking of betrayal and shadows that lingered inside the palace walls, Ethan tried to keep his distance, but no matter where he went, people recognized him. Some bowed in quiet respect, others glared as though he had stolen something that was never his. He cared little for either. All that mattered was that Lily was safe and the queen was alive. One night, as the palace settled into silence, the sound of alarms shook the air. Red lights flashed through the halls and soldiers ran past Ethan, shouting warnings. He caught one of them by the arm and asked what was happening. "Saboteurs," the guard said breathlessly. "They are inside the palace. They want the queen." Without waiting, Ethan ran toward the throne hall. He knew the guards could handle themselves, but he also knew how quickly danger could strike. His heart pounded as he turned corner after corner, hearing the clash of steel and the cries of men fighting for their queen. When he reached the hall, chaos greeted him. Shadows moved swiftly between the pillars, blades glinting in the light. Soldiers battled the intruders, but the enemy fought with desperate fury. And at the far end of the chamber, Queen Alexandra stood near her throne, guarded by only 2 knights as the rest of her protectors clashed in the open floor. Ethan did not stop to think. He grabbed a fallen guard's sword and pushed forward. His arms ached under the weight of the weapon, but his will drove him on. He met one of the attackers head-on, blocking a strike that would have cut into the Queen's knight. Strength was less than his opponent's, but his timing and resolve carried him through. He forced the blade aside and struck hard, sending the man crashing to the ground. The Queen's eyes found him through the chaos. For a brief second, her gaze gave him strength, steadying his breath in his hands. He pushed on, helping the knights drive back wave after wave of saboteurs. A sudden cry broke the air. Lily had slipped into the hall, escaping the hands of her attendants who tried to keep her hidden. She called for her mother, her small voice trembling. The moment she appeared, two intruders turned their eyes toward her. Fear clenched Ethan's chest, but his body moved faster than thought. He sprinted across the floor, pushing past blades that slashed at his arms, and reached her just as the attackers closed in. Lifting her into his arms, he shielded her with his body and swung wildly with the sword. The attackers faltered as guards closed in behind him, cutting them down before they could harm the child. "Stay with me," Ethan said, his breath ragged as he pulled Lily back toward the Queen's throne. Alexandra stepped forward, her hands trembling though her face remained calm. She took her daughter into her arms and turned her gaze back to the battle. "Dan, with me," she said to Ethan, her voice steady despite the storm around them. And he did. Side by side with her knights, Ethan fought until the last of the saboteurs fell. The hall was filled with smoke and broken bodies, the smell of fire and steel hanging heavy in the air. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of soldiers catching their breath. Ethan lowered his sword, his arms aching, his chest burning with exhaustion, yet he stood tall as the Queen turned to him. Lily still clung to her mother, but her eyes found Ethan through the haze. She gave him a small, tired smile. "You risked everything again," Alexandra said quietly, her voice carrying across the hall. "Not only for me, but for my daughter." Ethan shook his head. "I only did what needed to be done," but the Queen's eyes told him she saw more. She saw a man who had chosen again and again to step into danger when he had no duty to do so. She saw someone who stood not because of orders or titles, but because of something stronger. The nobles entered the hall soon after, their faces pale at the sight of destruction. Some bowed low to the Queen, others glanced at Ethan with a mix of awe and unease. Whispers started at once, voices carrying words like fate and loyalty. Ethan ignored them all. His eyes were only on Lily, safe in her mother's arms, and on the Queen, who stood tall despite the night's horror. He felt the weight of what had happened, the weight of choices made, and he knew deep inside that his life could never return to the quiet path it once followed. The battle was over, but something new had begun. The palace stood quiet after the attack, though the scars of the battle remained. Broken stone lay scattered across the hall, and guards patrolled every corner with sharper eyes. The Queen's advisors worked through long nights, hunting down those who had betrayed her, but Alexandra herself seemed unchanged. She walked the halls with calm grace, her daughter at her side, and wherever she went, whispers followed her.
Ow.
Ethan tried to return to his ship. He had done his part more than once, and he longed for the comfort of the stars. But each time he prepared to leave, someone came to stop him, guard, a servant, or sometimes Lily herself, asking him to stay. He could not bring himself to walk away while the girl clung to his sleeve and begged with her eyes. At last a message reached him. The Queen wished to see him in private. He entered the same throne chamber where they had first met. Now the room was lit softly by tall lamps, instead of blazing torches. Alexandra sat not on her throne, but in a smaller chair, her crown set aside on a table. She looked less like a ruler in that moment and more like a woman burdened by the weight of her choices. "Sit," she said gently. Ethan obeyed, though unease filled him. Silence stretched between them before she spoke again. "You have saved my daughter twice. You have stood against enemies who wished me dead. You have risked your life again and again, without promise of reward. I must know why." Ethan lowered his eyes. Because it was right. Because no child should suffer, and no mother should weep if I can stop it. I am not a knight. I am not a noble. I am only a pilot. But I could not turn away. The Queen studied him with steady eyes. Then she rose, walking closer until she stood only a step away. "You call yourself only a pilot, but you have shown more honor than many who wear titles. The court speaks of you. Some call you dangerous, Others call you blessed, but I see something else. I see a man who acts with heart, not with ambition. That is what I need at my side." Ethan frowned, unsure if he understood. "At your side?" Alexandra nodded. "I ask you, Ethan Cole, to remain, not as a guest, not as a servant, but as my consort. Stand beside me. Share in my burdens. Protect this kingdom with me. Perhaps in time, share in my life." The words struck him harder than any blade. He had never dreamed of such a thing. He thought of the stars, of the quiet life he had lived, of the freedom he had always claimed as his own. Yet when he looked at her, he saw not only a queen, but a woman who had trusted him with what she valued most. And when he looked at Lily, peeking shyly from the doorway, he saw the girl he had promised to keep safe. He felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. To leave would mean returning to a simple life, drifting from one job to the next, forgotten by the world. To stay would mean chains of duty, endless eyes watching him, and a future he could not fully see. But in that moment, he understood something deeper. It was not about duty or reward. It was about belonging. For the first time in his life, he belonged to something greater than himself. Ethan drew a slow breath. "If I stay, I cannot promise to be the man your nobles want. I cannot promise to be polished or proper. I can only promise to be honest. I can only promise to stand when danger comes." A small smile touched Alexandra's lips. "That is all I ask." The chamber fell silent again, but it was no longer heavy. The choice was made. Ethan bowed his head, not as a servant, but as a man accepting a bond that could not be broken. Lily ran forward, throwing her arms around his waist. "I knew you would stay," she said, her voice bright with joy. Alexandra placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, then met Ethan's eyes once more. There was warmth there now, where once there had only been caution. That night word spread through the palace. The queen had chosen a consort, not from among the nobles, but from among the people. Some were shocked, others whispered of scandal, but many spoke of hope. They said perhaps a new chapter was beginning, one where courage mattered more than blood. Ethan did not care for their words. All he cared for was the quiet peace of knowing he had found his place. No longer a drifting pilot, no longer a man alone among the stars. He was at her side now, and his journey had only just begun.